About supply chain management, everyone. Can y'all someone close those doors over there? Thank you. Because I can be, everybody, I'm assuming I'm not using a mic, but I have a loud, obnoxious voice. Everybody can hear me okay, right? Okay. But what we're going to do today, so I've got the announcements up here. There are a lot of assignments already posted, but don't be overwhelmed. The due date is not for a good ways away. What I'm going to do today first is just have a short lecture going over the rest of the introduction, and then I'm just going to talk about some upcoming assignments we have. For the upcoming assignments we have, it's a lot of independent work, but I do want you to know when you need help, you can come to me. I'll be glad to help you. Especially easiest if you come to class with the questions. Any questions before we start? So I'm going to do like last time. I've got some slides I'm going to go over. We're going to answer those quiz questions as we go. Periodically, I'll emphasize some things, and when I do, I'll let you know when I think it's really important to write some things either in the slides or the notes. And these slides you still have from last class. I gave a hard copy of the slides in last class. These are still those. Okay. And again, have the announcements there, but I'm going to go back to this after my brief lecture to talk in depth about those assignments. So in last class we were doing our introduction to supply chain management, and this is the slide. We went to this slide, but then we did not actually talk about it. So this was the last slide we looked at, and now we're starting on this one. Okay. We're still at the mainly qualitative part of the class where we're talking about terms, concepts, how things work. Pretty soon we're going to be getting to the numbers and doing a lot of quantitative stuff. We're still at the concept part right now. Okay. I've got a phrase up there. It's not supply chains, it's not companies, but supply chains that compete. Now I think I started to talk about this last time, but then decided I didn't want to go through the slides. So let me give a brief introduction again. I think the example I used was Chick-fil-A. And so Chick-fil-A, awesome sandwiches, right? And even better service. And for them to be able to deliver those awesome chicken sandwiches, they have to get good chicken supplies. They have to get chicken breasts that have good taste, that are tender, have the right texture all around, that cooks just right. And for them to do that, they've got to rely on chicken processors to process it just right and select the right birds. And those processors have to rely on the chicken farmers to raise them the right way. And they have to rely on people who are breeding the right birds, and so on. So there's a lot of things that happen that have to work just right to make Chick-fil-A be a very competitive firm. And so Chick-fil-A, they know that it's not just them competing with McDonald's, but it's them and all their input suppliers, their total supply chain competing against McDonald's and all of McDonald's supply chains. And so I actually think, and so I would circle that saying right there where we say it's supply chains, not companies that compete. Because I think if you told that to an interviewer, if you were interviewing for a job and you mentioned that, they'd be pretty impressed by you saying that. And now in this class, when we talk about supply chain management, we're somewhere in between supply chain design and supply chain implementation. But I do want to start off and then talk about how those are a good bit different conceptually. Most classes in supply chain management here at OSU are probably going to focus more on supply chain strategy, supply chain design. And so there are no number of other supply chain courses here. There's a marketing course in supply chain management, very good. There's an industrial engineering course that's very good, and there's a MSIS course called Supply Chain Analytics that's very good. And for the most part, those courses are not very quantitative, not even the industrial engineering one. They're mostly focused on vocabulary and how you design a supply chain. Things like how many input suppliers do you have? But there's a whole other side of actually implementing it, and that's like the day-to-day grind of making things work. I want to separate these two to begin with to give you an idea, because they are very different things. The design is like you choosing your major and what your minor is going to be, so mapping out your college career. The implementation is like you figuring out what courses do I want to take to get this degree, what kind of grades do I want to have, how do I get those grades, and so on. So we're thinking about a supplier, the design of a supply chain. Again, going with our natural chewing gum. And what are some ingredients in natural chewing gum? Chicle. Yeah, chicle, flavoring like mint extract, and sweetener. And so if you're starting or designing a new supply chain for this chewing gum company, one question might be, okay, who am I going to get my chicle from? Who am I going to get my mint extract from? And how many suppliers do I want? I may not want to rely on just one person, because what if they go bankrupt? Or what if they have a supply interruption? I may want redundancies in my input suppliers, so I make sure I can always produce the gum that I need to. And then you also got to figure out how you're going to interact with those suppliers. For some people, maybe they don't spend much money on mint extract, so they just buy a lot of mint extract when they need it and keep a lot in inventory. They don't need much, so it doesn't take up much room. So all they do is they just go to a supplier and say, okay, give me this stuff, and they keep a lot in inventory. But maybe their chicle that maybe needs refrigeration, and maybe they spend a lot more money on it, is more bulky. Maybe they enter into long-term contracts with those suppliers, and this happens a lot. So they may establish a contract with the chicle supplier that says, we agree to buy this much from you, and to make sure that you can actually deliver on this, you will agree to keep safety stock of a certain amount of this. So if you have some interruptions, you can still deliver to me. One of the big problems in supply chain management is that you can write contracts with businesses, you can make agreements, but they don't always follow through. And yeah, you can take people to court if they don't fulfill a contract, but going to court is costly, and sometimes it's in business's interest just to not fulfill a contract. So you have to be very wise about not only how you're going to get supplies from an input provider, but the relationship you have with them, the contracts you have with them. And then another thing about supply chain design is you say, okay, we have this gum, it's going to be sold to people. What if there's some kind of outbreak of salmonella or something, and we need to make sure it wasn't our gum that was involved with that. We need to know which batch of our gum was sold in Eden, Oklahoma, and was sold in Roanoke, Virginia. And so we need a way of tracking everything that we sell, where it goes, and who ultimately buys it, the end consumer. We need a method for doing that, and that's another thing about supply chain design. So an analogy is like if you're going to go to war, before the war actually starts, you're trying to figure out where's my first invasion going to be, what's my first battle plan, things like that. And just like there's a saying in war, let's see, it goes, all plans are obsolete by the time what? The first shot is fired. So people, they have a big plan for how the invasion is going to go, but as soon as the first shot is fired, things don't work out. Things are different than what they planned, and they have to adjust to it. And so there's also a lot of activity in the implementation of the supply chain. So we think we know on a big scale how we want it to work, but on a day-to-day basis, how do we actually get there? And so like one thing I have there is like how much safety stock of chickle should we maintain. So maybe we have this agreement with a provider that they say they're going to provide us a certain amount of chickle, and they'll keep safety stock just in case, but I may want to keep some safety stock too just in case something goes wrong. Like what if a batch gets messed up? I can't just wait for the new shipment. I've got to be able to have inventories there. That's a decision I make, so it's a part of implementation of that supply chain. How often should we hold SIOP meetings? You don't know what SIOP is yet, but you will, and this is really, really important. So you can imagine in war, after the first day of battle, the generals get together, the cavalry leader, the infantry leader, and today, you know, Air Force stuff like, they're going to get together, talk about what happened, and then figure out what they're going to do tomorrow, right? SIOP is kind of like that. One thing you saw yesterday is supply chains are long, even within a company. There's tons of different roles within supply chains. And they have to, and the main thing with supply chains is coordinating that flow. Coordination is the big thing. So write on that piece of paper, coordination, all caps. Coordination requires communication, regular meetings, regular updates, information sharing. And the SIOP is all about that. An analogy with OSU, so they had this plan for this semester of how we're going to have classes, but if we have another big outbreak, then OSU has to meet regularly and say, okay, given this outbreak, do we need to go online again? That's like what a SIOP is. Then we have this thing, who's in charge of demand planning / forecasting. Demand planning, you know, it's just a term they use. That means we're trying to figure out in the future how much are people going to want to buy from us. That's all it is. This is a big field now. One of my recent grad students took a job at Cargill where her job is now in supply chain management demand planning. She didn't know what demand planning was till she interviewed for the job. She never heard the term. But she was a good ag business student, and they knew she could learn it fast. So, and they knew that she had the skills to pick it up fast and go with it. So we have the design and the implementation. Now I'm going to go a little more in depth into about this design. But before I do that, I want to back up a little bit and give you an idea of how I'm trying to teach these subjects in a college class and give you a better understanding of why college classes are structured the way that they are. This is one of the most famous concepts in the whole world, all the way back from the 5th century BC, from the philosopher Plato, the student of Socrates, and Plato was the instructor of Aristotle. And when Plato's talking about our knowledge of things, he has this thing called the divided line. Now I've got the acronym FMOI. So at the bottom is like images. And if he's talking about the subject of beauty, then he's talking about like the image of a face. It's an object that we see. And then above that is the original object. So because we visualize different things, the same face may be seen differently by different people. You know, people who see color, people who are colorblind. And above that you have a mathematical representation of that face. The actual structure of it, if you boiled it down to numbers, like if you made a 3D printing of the face, or 3D printing of what you consider to be a beautiful face. And then above that you have this thing called a form, and that's like a concept of beauty in itself, what it is as if it could be understood by a perfect being, by like a God. Now I know this seems like we just took a really strange turn here in supply chain management. But this is, and so you have things at the bottom, things we actually see and encounter, and then you have the things at the top, the actual thing itself, and our imperfect understanding of it. And in this class, and in every class, we're trying to achieve some of all of that. So at the bottom, images, original objects. So there'll be times when we actually see things that an actual person does in supply chain management. We'll see like some of the software they actually use. And so we'll get to understand some of the day-to-day activities involved in supply chain management. Kind of things you get if you were actually working. But of course, we can't do that for every position in supply chain management. We only have a limited amount of time. And what's more important for you is to understand the big picture of supply chain management. You don't know if you're going to be in supply chain management, or if you are, where you're going to be in it. And so we need to see it from a more panoramic vision. And so this class is called Quantitative Supply Chain Management and Agribusiness. So not only are we going to see the actual job duties of people in supply chain management, we're going to go on a higher level and see it in a mathematical form. And that mathematical form is unlike, there are some people in supply chain management who are just doing programming and math all day long and data analysis, and so this resembles what they're doing, but most people don't, of course. But for us to really understand supply chain management as a whole, what it is, sometimes the best way of doing that is seeing a mathematical representation of it. Just like when you're learning about how markets work in intro, you could have learned that just by trading on the market, just from real life experiences. But you also learn it in a higher version through supply and demand diagrams. And then you have the thing at the top, supply chain management as it really is. No one in the world completely understands supply chain management as it is, but we're trying to get as high as we can. And so what we're trying to do in class is go up and down, up and down. What do people actually do on the job? How do we think about it in the form of a concept? And I think we've started to answer some of our questions. So question 1 says as one is trying to decide how many suppliers to use for one's chicle inputs in order to ensure supplies in case one supplier experiences disruption. That is part of supply chain strategy design. When deciding whether to hold an impromptu SIO meeting to discuss a supply problem, that is part of supply chain strategy implementation. And questions like this, I'm always going to make it pretty obvious which one it is. And then in question 3, we have the highest or most difficult form of understanding of a concept, whether it be the subject of beauty or supply chain management. According to Plato, it's the form. All right, enough philosophy, back to supply chain management. We're going to cover this once, then we probably won't do it again, but I want us to see some facets of supply chain design because it's just important to know. And so we've got 5 different terms here that I'm definitely going to want you to know. We've got make to stock, make to order, engineer to order, and then push and pull. And what these refer to is, so when this is supply chain design and we're figuring out how are we going to do things. So we know what we're going to do is we're going to take a bunch of inputs and we're actually going to put them together and then sell it. And we're going to sell it to consumers. So there's the actions of producing it, and then there's the decision to buy it. So when we're producing a good, it's like we're pushing it out the door. It's like putting something together, then pushing it out, trying to sell it. And when a customer places an order, that's them pulling, saying, I want this. You're trying to push the good out, the customer's trying to pull the good in. And so what most of us are familiar with is this make to stock concept. Because when you go in Walmart, everything has been make to stock. You don't order something at Walmart and then they all of a sudden put it together for you, for the most part. And so this is where you're producing a good and you say, I'm going to go ahead and buy the raw materials, prepare the components, assemble it, and then I'm going to put it on display, and then someone can buy it. So I don't know who's buying it yet. Then you have make to, and so in make to stock, it's mostly push until right at the end when the consumer buys it, that's when they pull. And then we have make to order. That's where you get all the raw materials together and you get everything ready. You prepare the components, but you don't actually put it together until someone buys it, usually because they have to specify something about it. So you're pushing by getting the raw materials. You're pushing by getting all the raw materials ready, but then you stop, and then the consumer pulls by saying, I want this, and then you put it together, and then they pull again, and they buy it. Okay, so let's think about some analogies. You can go in Walmart right now, or let's say Sprouts, and they have a bunch of sandwiches already prepared. Tuna sandwiches, roast beef sandwiches. That's make to stock because everything's already been done. It's assembled and everything, you just buy it. In the form of sandwiches, what would be like an example of make to order? Yeah, like give me an example of a restaurant. What's that? Yeah, what do they call it? I always want to say ditch witch, but it's what? Niche witch? Witch witch. Okay, let's say Subway, because I don't want to say which. All these sandwiches places are the same. You go in there, they have all the ingredients right in front of you, and then you say, I want the 6-foot Italian sub, and then they put it together. So they push, all the stuff's out there, you pull by saying what you want, and they decided make to order because they can't. Why did they not just prepare all these sandwiches in advance? You know why. It's not a hard question. I hardly ever ask hard questions.
Because they don't know how many they're going to sell.
Yeah. So I came in and wanted an Italian sub, but they didn't know how many they were going to actually sell. They'd rather wait to build it until then. And probably because some people like me, I want it drowning in vinegar, so they want to wait to see how much vinegar you want. Things like that. Then you have engineer to order, where you know there's this thing you can produce and you have the raw materials, but you don't even start anything until the customer places an order. What might be an example of something like that?
A home.
Yeah, I think a home would be, yeah, that's right. So a builder, they know all houses are made of basically the same thing, but you've got to wait till the homeowner tells you the design of the house before you even start preparing your components and putting them together. Yeah, that's a good example. Never thought of that example. And so this is easy stuff, right? This is just common sense stuff, but all we're doing is we're putting vocabulary to these things. So in question 4, Natural Chewing Gum Company only makes elderflower gum after a customer places an order. And then I'm always going to give you specifications like this that just scream the answer. Because the gum is only rarely requested and the strength of the elderflower in the gum must be engineered according to specific customer's request, in this particular case, which of the following stages of supply chain design are considered pull? Is prepare components pull? So are they doing make to stock, make to order, or engineer to order? You know. No, because they're saying it must be engineered according to the specific customer's request. So they've got to wait for the customer to tell them what kind of recipe they want to use. So engineer to order. So if it's engineered to order, do they buy the raw materials in advance? Yes. Push. Do they prepare the components in advance before the order? No. Pull. And so do they assemble before? No. Pull. Sell the product, pull. And as one young lady is learning who doesn't want to say anything, it's okay to answer through nods. I accept those as well. Are you shy? Okay, that's okay. At Subway, the ingredients for each sandwich are prepared in advance, but the sandwich is not made, read, assembled until the customer places an order. Which type of supply chain design is this? We already answered that. Make to order. And by the way, all the material we're talking about, everything that's in the slides, is also in that Chapter 9 reading. It's called Chapter 9, Forecasting for Supply Chain Management. Any illustration like this is also going to be there as well. Okay. Now, sales, inventory, and operations planning. One thing I definitely want you to know is what that thing is and those three things of it. So it's absolutely essential if you're going to pass this course, you know the three main activities of supply chain management, SIOP in particular, is forecasting, the master production schedule, and the materials resource plan. You already know what forecasting is. It's predicting the future, and it's usually about sales. You don't know what the master production is yet. We'll talk about that next class. We'll just briefly talk about materials resource plan. But these are considered the three main things in supply chain management. You take any test for a certification, you're going to be asked those words. And so notice I have here, these words show up in that certification: materials, master scheduling, forecasting. It's all there. And what these things do, they all work together. And so what happens in most every business is you first put together your forecast. And this is the same as demand planning. So put an arrow to forecast and say AKA demand planning. Demand planning. With our natural chewing gum company, what we're doing is we're saying, okay, for the next 6 months, how much of each particular gum do we think people are going to buy? For the mint gum, how much are they going to buy in June? How much are they going to buy in July? For the cilantro gum, sounds delicious. How much are they going to buy in June? How much are they going to buy July? Cilantro gum is my idea. If you steal it, I will sue you. So it's just figuring out how much people's going to buy. That's all it is. One of the main reasons in doing that is because the people who are going to produce the gum need to know how much to produce. They may want to make a lot of gum in advance. They want to produce how much they need each month, but they need to know how much needs to be available each month for them to figure out how much to produce, and that's what the master production schedule is. All of next week, we're going to be talking about the master production schedule. So obviously, to know how much to produce, you need to know how much you think people are going to buy. And then to produce things, you need materials. To make gum, you need, what's an ingredient, William? What's another one? Mint. Some kind of flavoring. Oh, that's okay. I do that all the time. So we're just talking, that's a story of my life. And so I'll tell you what, whenever you do that, you can just call on Steve to answer. All right? So point to Steve. Sweetener, there you go. There you go. What we need to have, if we're going to produce this gum, the master production schedule says we're going to produce 10,000 tons in June. We need to make sure we have all the chicle and mint extract and sweetener by then. We need to make sure the labor force is going to be well, that we have the equipment needed. Someone needs to make sure all the materials are going to be there, and that's what the materials resource plan is. So what you're seeing here I'm going to spend a good bit of time on this slide because what I'm trying to do now is kind of give you some of the essence of supply chain management. I'm going to say a lot of words, but I'm going to tell you a few things to write down that are really important. These three things that should be obvious have to work together, right? Just like the university, when figuring out classes, they have to know, well, how many students are going to be here? Okay, now once we know how many students we have, how many supply chain management classes do we need to have? Okay, that's the master production schedule. Once we have that, who's going to teach these courses? This isn't a new thing to business. This has always been done. But this is what's different about supply chain management and why supply chain management came to be. I'm going to say something, and then I'll let you find a way to paraphrase and write it down. I'll give you a chance. Historically, sales teams. So, Gianna, you want to be in sales. So you have salespeople out there working with clients, and it used to be the salespeople would come up with the forecast. But salespeople were overly optimistic. They would always say, we're going to sell more than they can. And so businesses learned they had to take that responsibility away from sales. They had to get input from sales, but someone else had to make the decision. By talking with sales and looking at data, that became a supply chain management thing. Okay. I don't know how you want to paraphrase this, but this is what we want to say. It used to be sales doing the forecasting, but they did not give good forecast. And so supply chain management emerged to take over that role. In preparing this class, I interviewed a number of people in supply chain management. One of them was a guy named Greg Hart in John Deere. And one thing he told me, and he was helping me understand this, and he said, we were actually very relieved when they took that responsibility away from sales. Because he said, as a salesperson, you felt like you were supposed to be optimistic. You know, if you thought you weren't going to sell much, that was like saying, well, I plan to do a shitty job this year. And so they would naturally wanted to be optimistic, but they knew they were given bad forecasts, but they felt like they didn't have much choice. So once that responsibility was taken away from them, they can then go to the supply chain manager in charge of demand planning says, how much do you think we're going to sell? Say, well, we want to sell this much here, this much here, this much here. Then the guy looks at data and says, well, y'all never sold this much before, so let's come up with a more realistic forecast. And so you see that conversation, that coordination there. Another thing I want you to emphasize is these three units have to regularly meet, share information, like updates, and coordinate. And that's what SIOP meetings are for. So again, these three units, they have to meet on a regular basis, share information, new updates, and coordinate their activities. Because just like in war, you can have the best battle plan in the world, but as soon as the first shot is fired, there needs to be a completely new plan. Yeah.
I know share information. What's the rest of it? These three units need to meet regularly to share information.
Coordinate. Then the last thing I want you to add to this is two requirements. Is one, this needs data, actual data, numbers. So you need people who can work with data. But it also needs soft skills, meaning people skills. Let me kind of just give you an example real quick. So maybe these units have already, they've got their forecasts and they've decided how much they think they want to produce, things like that. But then something comes up. Turns out consumers are buying a lot more than people thought. Consumers are placing orders, and it looks like the forecast is going to be pessimistic, and they're going to sell more. So you have this SIOP. They even say what it, sales, inventory, operations planning. What is operations again like? We know what sales are, we know what inventories are, but there's 1,000 different ways of phrasing this. Like how you run a factory. Thank you, William. Can't just nod and answer for that, can you? You know sign language? You know sign, we can communicate like that. I don't know it, but I'll just pretend you had the right answer and you'll be like the smartest person in class. So, turns out we're going to sell a lot more than we thought. And so these people have to get together and they have to say, look, your master production schedule has to be changed because you're going to need to produce more for June than we thought. You're currently on schedule to not even produce enough to sell to existing orders. We've got to produce more. And so they've got to then figure out how the master production schedule is going to change, which means the people in charge of materials have to change their plans to make sure there's enough ingredients and workforce there. And for most of this class, because the class is fairly quantitative, it's going to seem like supply chain management is a numbers thing. But of course, in the real world, these are people who have to be across the table from one another. They have to compromise. They have to point out problems in the other person, and that requires good people skills. And you know, every company wants better soft skills, people skills with people, writing, expressing an email just the right way. And so, you know, if you're talking with an interviewer about your impersonation of supply chain management, and they're asking you things like, what kind of skills do you have that will help you be an effective member of our supply chain management team? It will press them to say, I not only know all the terms, a lot of these terms, I'm good with the numbers, but I think I'm pretty good with people too. I know how to compromise with people and work with people to get things done, to put my own ego out of the way. Because really, a lot of supply chain management arose because people in different units were not working well with each other. So you have Gianna over there in the sales team. And you've got Steve over here. He's in charge of producing things when he's not texting on his phone. So he's got to produce the things. And what's my nodder's name? Rachel. And then Rachel, she's in charge of material. Each have their own little kingdoms in a way. They're the big manager, and they have their own labor force. And whenever someone else has to change something, that means you've got a problem and you've got a problem, and you know what people are like. They get angry at each other so easily, they get resentful, they only see the weaknesses in other people, not the strengths. And sometimes you need that person in the middle to mediate it, to go between them, and to handle all these egos. And that's a lot of what supply chain management is as well. That's the kind of thing you don't really see in textbooks because it's just hard to explain as a concept. The first year I taught this class, I brought in a bigwig supply chain consultant, Stacy St. Julian, to give a talk on exactly what supply chain management is from the boots on the ground perspective, because I needed it as well. I can read the textbooks and learn the math, but I needed to know what the job was like. And I was walking with her one time, and we were talking about these soft skills, and I said, Stacy, kind of what's your, when it comes to soft skills, what's the things you've had to learn the most, that was the biggest challenge for you? And she's a professional female. She said, handling male ego. You know, she would go into a business and would be the problem finder. So she was sent into a business to find out where the problems were. And nobody likes that, right? And, you know, especially when she started, business was a male-dominated industry. It's certainly not like that anymore. But she had to come in to people, one, who resented her being a female, but two, resented her trying to find problems with the business. But she had to work with these people to get information from them, and she had to learn how to do that. And that's not the kind of thing you can really teach in college. I certainly can't teach it, but that's the kind of thing you learn on job. But it's important to know that that's a very important part of the job. And so what this means is that if you're kind of an introvert, like Rachel, who won't talk in class, but you're really, really good with numbers, like I'm sure Rachel is, she's probably like a math whiz, there's a place in supply chain management for you. If you're a people person, like Gianna, you probably don't code for fun, right? Computer code or anything like that, it's not fun for you. She's more of a people. There's a place in supply chain management for her. If you're a little bit of both, there's a place in supply chain management for you. That's one cool thing about supply chain management. And do know there are ways I'm going to, so the stuff we're just talking about and you're putting it down there, you're going to read more about it. There are ways I'm going to test you on that, but you'll mostly be able to express things in your own words. And you're not going to have to repeat the exact same examples that I give you. So now that we've talked about it a little, let's look at what the official definition is. SIOP, a plan reconciling sales forecast, the master production schedule, and the materials resource plan to ensure an effective company strategy for operating in the next month to a year. The SIOP is revisited and updated at least once a month. I hope my examples serve as a better definition than that. The two things that underline there that definition will give you that maybe I didn't do well is that underline operating in the next month to a year. So SIOP is kind of a short-term thing. It's about how do we just get through these next months. It's like Allison over here is graduating. She's got a whole life ahead of her. She's probably got this big life plan, but she also knows she's just got to get through this last semester. And senioritis is sitting in, right, Allison? Senioritis is a clinical condition. And what they don't tell you is that about 20 years later, it comes back. And what do they call it with guys? When a male has that midlife crisis, yeah. It's called a midlife crisis. So don't worry, you're always going to have anxieties, Allison. Life is never going to get easy. But you still got to have a plan for the next couple months, and that's what SIOP is about. And also underline revisited and updated at least once a week. And then I want you to write something else on the slide. Let me kind of say it first, and then you can figure out how to write it. The way we're going to be looking at supply chain management, it's going to make it seem like this is something that we make a grand plan and implement it to make this perfectly functioning company. That's how it's going to seem when we do the math and stuff. But in reality, don't try to write it down yet. In reality, supply chain management is mainly just trying to figure out what the hell is going on. Okay, so write it something like that. So supply chain management, people are talking, you're getting data. You're just trying to figure out what the hell is going on. And I'm using hell because you understand that expression. You've been in a class. There's a difference in class between I don't understand this and what the hell is going on. Because big companies They may produce 2,000 different products using 10,000 types of ingredients, have a workforce of 25,000 people, and no one person completely understands the business, least of all the CEO. But you've got to work as a unit, and part of supply chain management is just getting the people and the data together to figure out what is going on. What do we anticipate for the future? How are we going to make money in that future? And so supply chain management on the ground can be really, really messy. That makes sense? I think this is my last one. Yeah, I've only got one more little thing here. The SIOP is, we said that was a short run planning just in the next year, but there's also long run planning. And the one term I do want you to know there is enterprise resource plan. You'll see it does show up in those when you get a certificate, you have to know that word. And it's important to know. Think of enterprise resource plan as like the battle plan before the war starts. These are my soldiers, this is my tanks, this is what I have. What's my plan for going forward? How am I going to make sure I have everything in place before the first shot is fired? It's the long run plan. And then after a while, you revisit that long run plan. So the enterprise resource plan is trying to say, okay, for everything, what's this business as a whole trying to do in the next 5 to 10 years? And then the SIOP is those small steps in between. So the enterprise resource plan is like you trying to figure out what your major should be and what you should do in college to get the job you want. The SIOP is the week-to-week activities of trying to make that happen. I'm only going to want you to know the term enterprise resource plan and vaguely what it does. We're leaving with this. I think, yeah, these are the last two. So we talked a good bit about the SIOP. I spent a long time telling stories of it to try to give it some kind of tangibility to you, and we've seen its official definition. I want to just show you what the definition of enterprise resource planning is. Framework for organizing, defining, and standardizing the business processes necessary to effectively plan and control an organization so that the organization can use its knowledge to seek external advantage. An ERP system provides extensive database of information including master file records, repositories of costs and sales, financial detail, and analysis of product and consumer hierarchies in historic and current transactional data. You know, there's a reason there's that definition. To people who've been in supply chain management for 20 years, that makes perfect sense to them. That is the definition we need. For you, that's completely meaningless. And so what I want you to do is basically underline one or two things. I want to underline standardizing and data banks. Is anybody, I don't know why I've got so many, last class we were talking about poop forever, now it's the military, and I've never even been in the military, I don't know why I'm bringing this. Has anybody been in the military? Okay, you know the strange way sometimes they talk about numbers. How did the military call 9? I think they say niner. I think when the military says the number 9, they say niner, so that it's not confused with 5. 5, 9. You know, listen to me say 5 and 9. All you hear is just this character from Deliverance saying one long vowel. All right? You don't know whether I'm saying 5 or 9. You seen the movie? Yeah. Do not watch the movie. If you do, picture me as the good guy, not the bad guy. And so they were standardizing vocabulary to make sure you can communicate well. A lot of supply chain management is that. That's why they have very specific definitions. And the next class we're going to be talking about this master production schedule, which is just a clear way of communicating. So one part of an enterprise resource plan is just figuring out how we're going to talk to each other, including which software to use. And then data banks, that's just saying another part of this is we need to at some point put cost data and sales data together. So all you really need to know about the enterprise resource plan is that it's a long-run plan for the big picture strategy of a company. And the two specific things is that it tries to standardize things and that it relies on, it tries to bring together data as well. And you're always supposed to conclude a lecture by saying, are there any questions? No one ever does. Are there any questions? Allison, you good? Okay. Rachel? Okay. Okay, now, so that's the end of this lecture. I want to talk about the assignments coming out, give you some background on it. How much time do we have? We don't have much time. Remember, online students, you have to do the quiz 2 by midnight on 2/10. All right. Let me show you some of these new assignments. It looks tougher than it is, but it's going to intimidate you a little to begin with. And I know y'all are easily intimidated. Okay. There's this module that says sales forecasting module, 853 points. So this quiz for today, which y'all get by being here, it was it's just like 7 points. This is a big project, 853 points. But there's no excuse for not getting almost all those points. Here's why. One thing there is, we have these forecasting slides, and I have these up here. You can come get it after class, but you can download the slides, or you can get them here. Actually, Sarah, would you mind handing these out? Sarah's going to hand out the slides. Those are just notes. And these notes come from the first couple of pages from that thing that says Chapter 10, Quantitative Forecasting Tools. The first thing is just some general topics about forecasting that are really easy. Brock, can you hand out this? This is Brock Lesnar's handing out the hard copy of the quiz on the forecasting slides. What you want to do is take that hard copy, start going through the slides, and most of the questions are going to be really, really easily answered in the order that they're listed. I mean, sometimes you can just look at the figure and answer the questions. You don't have to do hardly any reading. So that's meant to be really easy. But then we have, and that quiz is only worth 53 points. But then we have this big project, data analysis assignments.
And we take that quiz?
Yeah, y'all take this quiz. Yeah. Let me have you hand out some more, Sarah. Hand out that too. Then there's this big project you got to do. And the slides are giving you an introduction to it. But what I'm asking you to do is you're going to download a data set, and everybody gets a different data set. So Steve's sales data is going to be different from Courtney's sales data. And then what you have to do, your end product is this. Sometimes for these things you got to right click and open a new tab to download it. Your end product is very simple. You're going to upload to Canvas a chart that looks like this. Yours won't look like that, and yours will look different from another person because everybody has different data. But what you're going to do, you're going to have one data series that shows actual sales data, and then you're going to have another data series in black where you removed trends and you removed seasonality. You don't really know what I'm saying yet, right? You don't know what it means to remove trend seasonality. It's going to require you to do regression in Excel to do things like a pivot table and VLOOKUP functions, things you may or may not have ever done. But here's the thing that you're going to like. There's a video tutorial on it, and it shows you exactly what to do each step of the way. It's using a different data set, so your numbers won't look the same, but if you just do exactly what it says to do here, you're going to have a perfect chart, and you'll get all 800 points. The purpose of this assignment is this. If you're in charge of forecasting sales, one way you do that is to look at the past and say how sales behaved in the past. And then you say, okay, to what extent is the past behavior called by like a upward trend or downward trend in sales? To what extent are the changes in sales due to seasonality, like spring, January, things like that? To what extent are there things in the data that we cannot explain just by long-term trends and seasonality that we need to investigate closer? The purpose of this is to put together a chart that would help you do that, because in the real world, most forecasting is done by making beautiful, beautiful charts and people sitting around looking at it and trying to figure out what the chart means. And it's good to know certain data analysis tools, and that's what that is. So I'm not helping you with any of that. We're not going to discuss it in class or anything. But when you run into a problem, don't hesitate to contact me. Make sure you try to figure it out on your own some. But you could even bring your computer here and show me the problem you're having, and I'll help you. And you've got a long due date. I don't know, it's like February 20th or something. I'm not sure. And then another, can I have y'all hand out again? Brock, can you hand these out? This is a quiz everybody needs to take online. I'm handing you out the reading. Of course, everything's online as well. But there's an article I want you to read about. It's about supply chain management during COVID, written to be pretty easy to understand. And go online and take a quiz about it. My advice is to take the hard copy and read the first question and then start reading the article till you find the answer. Write it on paper. Then read the second question, continue reading until you see the answer to it. Answer them on paper, then go online and submit it. For the most part, the questions are really, really easy. There are like 3 little essay questions that require more work, but it's meant to be a pretty easy read. And that is due when, does it say? So the sales forecasting assignment, that's not due till February 22nd, over a month from now. The reading assignment is not due till February 15th. So you still have a lot of time on that. But get started on it, because I'm not going to accept late submissions on it, because I'm giving you so much time. Okay, thank you for coming today and hope you have a great weekend.